Not gonna lie, I did not expect to be making another Overwatch video quite so soon, but I cannot stop thinking about Domina. For the unaware, Overwatch recently underwent a massive overhaul, and for our purposes, the important part of that is a significant advancement in the narrative alongside 5 new characters being released at once. Narratively, Talon, the initial primary antagonist faction against Overwatch before they kind of got sidelined in favor of Null Sector in recent years, has been taken over by Vendetta, daughter of former Talon leader Antonio Bartolotti, which is the man that Reaper killed in the Retribution mission from the Archives event. As part of this takeover, Doomfist has been de-Doomfisted and defenestrated. Sombra, Widowmaker, and Reaper have left Talon, Sigma's been locked in prison, Freya and Emery have joined Talon, kinda, and Vendetta's new allies are running the show. One of these allies is Domina, one of the 5 new characters introduced in the sweeping update. On the surface, this is a pretty straightforward character. She's an evil executive at Vishkar, the company that Symmetra works for and which Lifeweaver is on the run from. She is very definitely evil, having made a backroom deal with Vendetta where Vishkar will get first dibs on redeveloping areas that Talon destroys as part of all of the terrorism. And when Lucio begrudgingly asks her what her favorite animal is because she insists that he ask her, she says it's chinchillas because they make soft coats. She's C-suite, so she gets dressed up in this sort of modified business casual outfit with a white blazer with gold metallic lapels over the shoulders, a pencil skirt, matching gold belt, and a black sparkly top. Her biggest accessory is her giant pair of arms hovering behind her, which she controls to help her do most of her abilities. She's a poke tank with a lot of health, a barrier, and can hit pretty hard once you get into range, and her ultimate, the Panopticon, will lock enemies inside of a bubble shield that will block all damage going out, but not in. And if not broken, it'll explode and deal massive damage to whoever's inside. Now, if you're part of the heterosexual male part of my audience, of which I'm sure there are at least some of you for some reason, there's a possibility that you thought that this was a Gunnar-motivated design. Big boobs, big hips, thin waist, and a dommy-mommy attitude. I mean, her name is literally Domina. However, you are forgetting a few key details here. Namely, this is an evil woman with a fuck-ass bob and a certain charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent about her. Domina might incidentally be fun for the Gooners, but she is very much so for the girls, the gays, and the theys, joining the ranks of Symmetra, Sombra, and Moira in that field. She's Mother, and motherfucking 8. And I'll be the first to admit that this is not the first character I gravitated towards out of this, new batch of characters. I mean, for sure, the very first sin was a woman who ate, and in the grand tradition of being a white person from Alberta, I am obligated to respect biblical lessons when it's convenient for me, but I was actually pretty immediately obsessed with Mizuki. He's, I think, the first actual twink this game has. He's just incredibly bratty, and him and Wu Yang are the most golden retriever black cat dynamic this game will ever offer. Domina was definitely cool to me, but I didn't really think there'd be that much to her that would vibe with me, if that makes sense. I've always been kind of meh on the whole Vishkar plotline because it's been pretty underutilized, and I thought you might have something, maybe useful to offer down the road or something unique down the road. I initially just didn't really think I'd be that interested in her lore beyond the fact that, again, Mother. However, I started to think about her more, and all these little details started to stand out to me more and more until I realized how truly compelling this character is. And now I'm making that your problem too. Part 1. Never met a British girl before? The titles only get dumber from here, I'm sorry. The first big one is obviously her accent. Initially I thought it might be a fake accent altogether to just sound posh, but it turns out that she was actually an Indian woman who was raised in London before coming back to India to work for Vishkar. Immediately, at least to me, that's super compelling. Vishkar has always been presented as this sort of embodiment of corporate neo-colonialism, particularly in this Overwatch universe where it seems like the BRICS nations have become full, proper world powers, and have occupied a more complex place in the colonizer versus colonized dynamic. And an Indian woman with a British accent in a leadership position in that company immediately feels like a decision that's not only very loaded, but very intentional. It kinda can't not be. Especially because if you listen to her in game, she tends to play up her accent pretty hard when she's trying to sound superior to other people. There are moments with certain characters, I think normally Vendetta at most, where you really hear her relax a little bit, but with Symmetra or Lucio or Lifeweaver, she's at an 11 at all times. And that's a really cool choice. And it's one with very real analogies to the real world. There are half a dozen Dominas per 100 people in any boarding school on the planet with an annual tuition over $40,000 a year. And that includes coming from countries that are often economically overlooked, but where there is some incredible concentration of wealth and economic power. When I was in boarding school, the richest kids weren't the Canadians or the Americans, but frequently the Nigerian or Chinese or Thai or South Korean students whose families came from systemic money. One of my classmates was recently an MC for an ASEAN conference not that long ago and is, I think, family friends with the Thai royal family. I think that they were at their weddings. I'm not entirely certain. I never really know exactly how to interpret those tweets or those posts, but whatever. I'm pretty sure though that my pottery club co-captain was from a family that was a chaebol. And there was a South African guy in my drama class who was a De Beers of, yes, the De Beers Diamond Corporation. To be very clear, I did not get to that school by being from that kind of family, but it is most certainly a very radicalizing experience when it comes to how unfair the system is. You don't really realize quite how fucking incompetent the rich are until you see them learning, or not. However, the point I want to make here isn't just that there are rich kids out there. That is not a groundbreaking insight. But rather that there is a really, really complicated relationship that a lot of those kids have with having to prove themselves outside of their country. It genuinely is a bit of a mindfuck to go from being indisputably part of the top echelon of your society to one where you are part of a racial minority that is, by default, not perceived particularly positively. And being wealthy or being from the upper class of your country doesn't necessarily help with that. Go talk to Chinese university students in Vancouver for 30 seconds and you'll see what I mean. Domina's time in the UK is really not talked about much, at least not yet, but her dynamic is especially unique for two reasons. First, India and Britain have a unique colonial relationship. Namely, Britain did some of the worst atrocities of its imperial existence in the Indian subcontinent. And that is saying something. The British were not known for not doing atrocities during that period. The British dominated that region for a long time, and even still its influence is felt in stuff like, the prominence of cricket. However, a big thing about colonialism is that the colonists are inherently the upper class of that colony. And that makes their aesthetics and culture and identity something borderline aspirational for the colonized in the same way that wealth in general tends to be aspirational. In Quebec, English was the language of management, business, finance, and the upper class for a long time, while French was the language of the working class. It is not a coincidence that one of Canada's most premier universities, McGill University, and one of its wealthiest cities, Westmount, are both English enclaves of the Quebecois city of Montreal. There is still a connotation of wealth and power that comes with English there, and that affects how people internalize colonialism even between colonial powers. And the British accent's enduring connotations of being elite, snobbish, posh, and upper class are a pretty good example of it. And India is no exception. I'm sure that while Domina was in the UK, she worked hard to fit in, including by very consciously adopting not just a British accent, but an upper class posh one. And then when she went back to India, she just ramped it up even more because that connotation helped her reinforce that she is, literally imperially trained to be superior to her own people. Her hometowns are London, the center of Imperial Britain, and Utopia, the headquarters of the neo-colonial Vishkar Company. You can pretty easily see how the Overwatch team was connecting some dots to the history of British-run colonial companies like the Hudson's Bay Company in Canada, or obviously the East India Company in India. It's an incredible pull for an Overwatch character to be invoking these sorts of historical and cultural connotations. And that is really reinforced by how she dresses. Look at her. Whenever we've seen people from Vishkar portrayed before, they've been wearing clothing that either invokes a modernized or traditional Indian, or at least non-Western, fashion. Compare Symmetra to Domina, and you can see it really clearly. Domina is very obviously pulling from Western business fashion, obviously with some flair, but very much so not invoking anything that's supposed to, give the impression of being Indian. This is a pencil skirt, heels, tights, and a halter top with a blazer draped over the shoulders. This is the drag race version of what a regional manager for CIBC wears to the after party at their annual conference, or how a British MP is going to dress for Parliament in the summer. And that's the thing. It's drag. She's not just wearing professional clothes, she is performing Western business professionalism. And you might just say that's how a lot of companies do it, including a lot of Western companies, but we know Vishkar doesn't. They are a very Indian company, and not just in modern times. Domina's grandpa founded the company. It is generationally an Indian company, but she still feels the need to separate herself from that aesthetically as part of her corporate image. Meanwhile, Symmetra's wearing a hard light Mangtika for Christ's sake. Even with makeup, Domina draws a line between herself and Symmetra. Sim wears brown eyeshadow and a nude brown lip with her natural hair, whereas Domina wears a red lip with matching glittery eyeshadow and a bleached streak of hair in her bangs. And the eyeshadow in particular is kind of notable to me because it's hard to get a red pigment like that that'll stand out so brightly on her skin tone. You tend to get that by using a lighter foundation to help it pop, or by getting some insanely pigmented eyeshadow, and in part it serves to distinguish her from Symmetra by pulling different tones of her skin to the forefront. We'll get into a bit more later too, but just from this point on, this is already so cool to me. I think this is a really interesting way of approaching character design. The second thing, though, for me is that India and the UK are some of the most rigidly class-stratified modern democracies on Earth, whether it's aristocracy in the UK or the caste system in India. Where and how and to whom you're born will define your life, and while it is possible to change your class, you're still pretty bound by it, even if you do change into one that you prefer more. And for people born in the upper class who don't necessarily have the talent to justify it, you need to pull out all the stops to make sure that nobody starts to question your status, to question the idea that your bloodline justifies you being seen as better than everyone. And that brings me to my next point. Part 2. I'm a rich bitch. I'm the upper class. What really got me interested in Domina was seeing how Symmetra views her in contrast with her. Specifically in this tweet from Portergage talking about how Domina has a total lack of cybernetic enhancements, whereas Symmetra has a full prosthetic arm to help her with her hard light work. For the unaware, Symmetra was dirt poor as a child and only got plucked out of poverty once Vishkar discovered that she was extremely naturally gifted at manipulating hard light, which is the signature technology of Vishkar. Domina, by contrast, is literally the Vishkar heiress, definitionally a Nepo baby. To be fair to her, she didn't necessarily just rely on that. She did go and work and actually build her way up, but still, your grandfather founded the company. You're a Nepo baby, no matter what else you do. Even her official bio acknowledges that while she's a shrewd negotiator and a corporate operator, she's not particularly talented at hard light and has spent a fucking fortune to not only try and learn how to be better, but also build those arms that she used to compensate for her inadequacy. And again, this is a really cool way to tell us so much about not just Domina, but Symmetra, India, UK, Vishkar, and just the culture in general of the world of Overwatch. She is pulling from a violent, painful colonial history for personal professional gain, using the aesthetics and cultural markers and language of the UK as a way to establish herself as powerful, dominant, and maybe most importantly for her, upper class in India. In fact, if you wanted to take it a step further and get really brave with it, you could argue that she's tapping into the colonial, borderline, but not even really borderline fascist mindset that the dominant group is inherently better than the dominated group, not because of their talent or intelligence or anything else, but purely because of their status as part of that dominant group. Domina is not particularly talented as an architect or any of the scientific aspects of Vishkar, but she is a really good corporate navigator and backroom dealer, and she invokes her Britishness as a way to reinforce that she innately belongs in power in a country where those two things have had a long and complicated historical relationship. And again, it's not like she has to. We've seen other Vishkar higher-ups and power players, and none of them seem to do this. Domina stands kind of alone here, in large part because she's kind of just uniquely untalented relative to the other people in her position. She's kind of shit as a hard light architect, despite spending all her money to try and get better, or at least look like she's getting better. And so she needs to invoke this idea that she's inherently just better than everyone else by the nature of who she is as both an heiress and as a Brit in India. And you can compare her to Symmetra here again. Symmetra really frequently invokes traditional aesthetics and iconography in a way that Domina seems like borderline afraid of, like a second generation immigrant who's embarrassed of the weird food her grandparents make or the weird holidays that none of her classmates celebrate. Symmetra is a traditional dancer and she incorporates a ton of Indian cultural elements into every aspect of her fashion, technology, and work. I think Domina probably kind of resents her for it, both because Domina doesn't have her skill, but also because Domina's lack of skill precludes her from the luxury of being able to explore and experience that culture. This is going to sound like a bit of a non sequitur, but I promise it'll make sense in a sec. Once upon a time, Charlie Kirk made a comment about how if he saw a black pilot, he would just be praying that he was qualified, because he assumed that they wouldn't be. And there was a reply to that sentiment that I saw that really stuck with me. Namely, that if you ever saw like a black pilot with dreads or like even a face tattoo or something, he's probably the best pilot you're going to get because he'd have to be better than most by a lot to overcome the barriers that would be put in front of him just to get to that position. Symmetra is so talented that her insistence on invoking her culture and traditions in corporate tech environments that do seem to prioritize the way that Domina dresses, or at least give it a little bit of extra credibility, just doesn't create barriers for her in this world, or at least not barriers that she can't surpass on her own ability. But Domina can't do the same. She has to rely on weaponizing stereotyping and cultural connotations of wealth and power inherited from colonialism to put down the barriers that she can't cross the way Sim can. There are lines between the two where Domina is clearly unhappy that the investors want to see Symmetra because she's just so talented. She shows the limits of this technology. Or where Domina tries to imply that the two of them are both equally talented architects. And lines where Symmetra, despite very much so being below Domina in the chain of command, feels emboldened to talk some crazy shit because she knows Domina can't compete where she can't compare. Sim will come pretty close to outright implying that Domina doesn't actually understand how Vishkar's tech works at all. She just kind of bluntly, clumsily wields it like a rich girl who got a Beamer for Christmas and is just plowing through fucking mailboxes with it while she learns how to drive. And that brings me to my favorite part of this whole dynamic. Part 3. Shut up and dance. Widowmaker, Anran, and Symmetra all specifically refer to Domina having a lack of talent, which to me is a really interesting critique to be coming from such a weird combo of heroes. Like, everyone kind of trash talks Domina. They all trash talk each other in general, but like, talent is the word that comes up with these three. But then you realize that all three of them share one unique detail. They are classically trained traditional French and Indian dancers respectively. Why does that matter? Well, for one, Domina works so hard to portray herself as elegant and powerful, but I think she's actually kind of clumsy and awkward, or at least uncoordinated. She doesn't have the delicate touch that it not only takes to look as graceful and poised as all three of those dancers do, but also specifically to manipulate Hardlight the way that Symmetra does. Symmetra routinely incorporates these dancer-like flourishes into her movement and while constructing abilities, and Domina just doesn't. Or alternatively, Domina can't. Like I said, she's using all her tech and her money to hide her inadequacies as an engineer and architect. And that's not my opinion. That is literally just part of her bio. But there's so many fascinating ways that it manifests. Like, she doesn't walk. She hovers. Is it because she thinks she's too good to have to walk? Or is it because she can't really walk in her heels as gracefully as she'd like? Is she giving Manila Luzon in the Elegance After Dark runway and she just doesn't think she'd have to show us? Or is she giving Discord Adams? Well, you don't know because she just doesn't ever fucking walk herself anywhere. She doesn't reload her own gun, a task that requires dexterity to do quickly and a significant amount of talent with Hardlight for Hardlight weapons as seen with Symmetra and Lifeweaver, but instead holds it off to the side and lets one of the arms just blast it with some ammo. When she uses her barrier, she just points to where she wants it built and gets the arms to do the construction for her. When she uses her crystal charge, she gets an arm to thrust forward and push the construct out, and then she just snaps her fingers to tell it to activate it. When she uses her sonic repulsors, she has to lean way back to stay upright while the arms both fly forward. Every time she fires her gun, or only ability that she fully does by herself, you can see her trembling as she squeezes the trigger as if she's like struggling to hold it steady. I mean, it makes sense. It's a pretty heavy looking gun too. And you can see that when she tries to look casual in her hero select screen animation where she subtly braces her right arm with her left. Even with her Panopticon, the arms are the ones that summon the tech, and she just kind of clumsily thrusts it out in front of her while she's pointing at it. Compare that with Symmetra or Widow or Onron, all of whom move with such confident long strides, always maintaining balance and always retaining their poise. Widowmaker does all these acrobatic moves seemingly effortlessly. Symmetra literally cannot help but introduce little flourishes with her fingers with every movement. And Onron is always keeping her cadence even when wielding something as inherently unwieldy as fans that get dragged around by the wind. When I look at those three, I'm reminded of like drag race lip syncers like Mirage or Anitra or Jax, who not only hit their beats, but who are very deliberate in their movements from beat to beat. You watch them perform and you can see their bodies communicating everything that they're doing, like their whole body, not just the arm moving from one side to the other or whatever. They're constantly rebalancing to make sure that their movement looks right. They're on their way to the next move before it's actually time to make it, just so that they're always on beat. And they build that entire body into the performance. Domina, by contrast, is like, just kind of not capable of that, it seems like. Most of the other characters don't really pick up on it though, because all of her tricks are effective. Like, it does work. She does seem very confident and powerful and elegant on the surface. She's hiding behind this Miranda Priestley visage to hide that both literally and metaphorically, she is an inelegant operator. In her business dealings, she is brutal and cunning, but not particularly elegant. In her architectural work, she's even less so. Her constructs are cloudier than Symmetra's and Lifeweaver's, and they're often like very rudimentary compared to either of them. She wants to appear elegant though. Like, look at that yassified hand cannon of a gun she's carrying around. And you can compare her aesthetics with Hardlight to Lifeweaver and Symmetra, both of whom demonstrate a real talent for complex structures. Symmetra tends to prefer the more symmetrical designs, go fucking figure there, where Lifeweaver's inspirations are more nature-based, but it's undeniable that the two of them can demonstrate that they can construct these really complex objects in the blink of an eye. By contrast, everything Domina constructs is kind of, well, rudimentary looking, like I said. The colors are a lot more cloudy than Symmetra's, who can regularly produce these flashes of rainbows and a lot of transparency, or Lifeweaver's, who tends to create more outright opaque objects that don't materialize into the sort of solid objects that Symmetra's turrets do or whatever. It's not just color either, though. The geometry of Domina's constructs are always really blocky and inelegant, I guess. Her wall is uniquely flimsy in the sense that it's breakable in these pretty weak segments, even if in theory it can block more damage than just about any other barrier in the game. Her Panopticon and Crystal Charge are both pretty blocky. Like, they're not refined, I think you could say. They look a bit rough. And it almost looks like Domina kind of awkwardly tried to add in some floating add-ons to like digitally bejewel her constructs so they'd look a little bit fancier. But then you have those dancers who can see through it all and pick up on her nuances in her movement. It's like how an artist can clock AI a lot better than the average person because they know what to look for and are more familiar with how the little details should look. They see her for how inelegant she really is. And from there, at least for them, the whole facade begins to crumble, exposing how generally talentless and insecure she is in that battlefield environment. Like, she's so stiff. If you watch her floating around, she just looks like a straight up PNG. She basically never moves unless she is firing her weapon, and that's mostly only her trembling. She tries to hold it steady while charging a shot and then flinching once it goes off. And she tries to play it all off as like, just being too rich to care, you know? It's not that she can't do it herself, but why would she? Why should she? She's the heiress to Vishkar. She's richer than God, and she shouldn't need to do things like reload her own weapons or use her own abilities. When Emre correctly points out that her shoes look like shit in a pre-match interaction, she retorts that they're worth more than 50 of him. Like, she wears a nation's GDP on her feet, even if they're kind of ugly and basic, and the fact that they're expensive is proof that she's just that rich. But like, is that all really the case? A good example of this to me is how in her Hero Select animation, she'll drop a champagne flute for her arm to catch while she pulls out her weapon. But like, is that because she actually doesn't care if the champagne flute drops? No, obviously not. She still controls the arms. She's making them catch it, or at least programmed to be able to do so. She can always throw it on the ground or just set it down. She wants to prove she's rich and powerful, but also has the tech to literally pick up after her. But like, she could do the same thing by just handing it off to one of the arms. In fact, that'd arguably be far more impressive if she could hand off such a delicate object to a hand positioned behind her back without spilling a drop. It takes no dexterity to drop a glass the same way it takes no dexterity to hold your gun out and let someone else reload it. So it begs the question, is it because she doesn't care? Or is it that she doesn't trust herself, her abilities, her coordination, or her control of her own technology enough to be willing to risk accidentally dropping it? Part 4. Do that little dance without it, you'd be nameless. It just all fits so well with this character who wants to be this elegant tycoon. You know, the Monopoly man if he was a diva, but she clearly just kind of can't do it. She's best suited to being an enforcer or a thug, which I think is why she gets along so well with Vendetta, who's kind of similar, but isn't really trying to seem elegant. On top of that, she kind of has this money talks, wealth whispers contrast with Ash. Domina gives very nouveau riche, with her family only coming to money relatively recently compared to Ash being more old money, at least in terms of their mentalities, if nothing else. Ash has never felt the need to prove herself the way Domina seemingly constantly needs to. She doesn't fall into the same traps that the nouveau riche tend to do. Then again, Ash wasn't an Indian girl growing up in London, was she? Not to sympathize with the devil here, but Domina probably genuinely did have to prove herself a lot more than most in her position. She was meant to inherit one of the most influential companies on the planet, but she lacks the basic abilities that are fundamental to that business. She was growing up in London as an Indian girl, going to the kinds of premier private schools that are notorious for their classism, racism, and sexism. She's part of the upper class in London too, but class there isn't just money. British people are not collectively known for being kind to Indian immigrants to their country, even if they are the only reason that Britain has something worth eating that they can call a national dish. And again, she is a woman. A lot of the best schools in London in the modern day are either boys only or treat girls as a very secondary aspect of the school. So fucking duh, she's defensive and hostile. The combined effects of systemic British racism, the Indian caste system, the universal structures of misogyny, and the cognitive and social damage caused by having more money than God would make anyone an asshole. It doesn't excuse her, but no shit that she trashes everyone else. She has to believe that everyone else is a hater because what other option does she have if she doesn't want to lose her fucking mind? She has to live in the French vanilla fantasy that she is truly an elite among elites, and she reinforces that fantasy by playing into whatever cultural connotations will get others to play along. Obviously she's insecure. She doesn't possess the hard light artistry of Lifeweaver or Symmetra, or the grace and elegance of dancers like Widowmaker and Onron, or the true old money confidence of Ash. She's just not able to do it in spite of her best efforts to do so. She wants what they have and she can't have it. But she also can't let herself be insecure. She has to be powerful. So instead she has to reframe it all. Symmetra isn't elegant, she's frivolous and old-fashioned. Lifeweaver isn't an artist, he's a thief who didn't want to work as hard as she does. Onron isn't powerful, she's just a brat. Ash isn't the old money she wishes she was, because Ash is too stupid to know what a good thing she had with her family that she threw away just to be different. Widowmaker isn't a formidable blend of grace and danger. She's not floating like a butterfly, stinging like a bee. But instead, she should just stick to dancing. After all, without her little ballet, she'd still be nameless. And she'd certainly not be a Lacroix. Domina, unlike all the others, just has her name. That's really what she brings to the table here. It has to be enough because she can't fall back on anything else. And that's a far more precarious position than any of the others. Lifeweaver, Widowmaker, Symmetra, Onron, Ash, all of them are these genuine prodigies and legends in their own rights based on their actual talent. All 5 of them either started from nothing and built themselves from the ground up or deliberately threw away the advantages Domina clings to with tight claws because they didn't need them the way she does. What other option does she have but to drag them down? After all, it's not like they afford her any grace. They all point out she doesn't have talent, so why would she owe them the courtesy of respecting theirs? It's not like their talent made them the VP of Ishgard, did it? She is good at what matters. That's how she got where she is. Just because being a corporate mastermind isn't as flashy as making a pink tree out of hardlight or whatever bullshit Lifeweaver's doing doesn't mean that it isn't a real skill, right? And she is tough. She had to be to get to where she is. And I think that's why the one character she does seem to vibe relatively well with is Vendetta. Someone who not only makes Domina look more elegant by contrast, but who shares her bloodthirstiness and viciousness when it comes to climbing to the top over however many bodies are piling up in front of her. Part 5. Una lobo como yo no está pa tipo como tú. I think that in Vendetta, Domina sees someone who actually kind of gets her. She's another heir to an empire who's had to fight to be taken seriously and is constantly fending off threats who want to undermine her rightful place at the top. Vendetta, like Domina, understands that the battlefield is not just about strength, but about performance. It's a show, it's drag, it's theatrics, it's showing your power by showing the extravagance of that power. Domina does it by performing Girl Boss, and Vendetta does it by performing Gladiator, but both of them are genuinely very dangerous, violent, cutthroat people. Like, yes, obviously it's a performance what they're doing. Vendetta doesn't need to be wielding this fucking absurd sword that's bigger than her at full size, or dressing like a gladiator. But she does it because it proves a point. Domina doesn't need to be dressed like she owns 51% of this company, 75% of this city block, and 100% of every one of these bitches inside the building. They do it because the fact that they succeed while doing so is, itself, kind of manufacturing the same sort of thing that we talked about earlier with Symmetra. If you can be at the top of Ishgard with a gold shattered metallic lapel blazer with a sparkly black top with a boob window, or the top of Talon while cosplaying the empire that died in your homeland a millennia and a half ago in the Colosseums they left behind, then it's kind of proof that you must be some genuine threat in some other way. It's kind of the Elle Woods approach. People assume that someone who looked and acted like Elle Woods was inherently unserious and inherently unintelligent. She was, just this bimbo. But then she made it into Harvard, and suddenly now it's like, oh, so if she's getting this far while giving bimbo sorority girl who's just looking to become a senator's wife, she's clearly got way more going on under the hood than we realized. And that is relevant. I've said throughout this that Domina's untalented, but that isn't really true. She's extremely talented as a corporate politician. She deliberately did choose to not immediately get into Vishkar, even though her name obviously still carried her pretty far in other sectors. And in her time in the private sector, she worked to become a better debater, a better businesswoman, and a better corporate operator. She is unequivocally one of the best in the business when it comes to being an executive, a financier, and a corporate strategist. She desperately wants to be seen as being naturally, effortlessly talented as a hard-light architect as well, and she definitely falls short of that, but it also does take a lot of talent to convincingly pull off the illusion that she does. Drag's not easy. She fools just about everyone into thinking that she is a natural talent at this stuff, even when they can see her relying on these huge arms for doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And that's in an environment where there are a lot of incentives to push her out of the way to make room for new power players in Vishkar. Same way that happened to Vendetta with Talon. The fact that her ultimate is called the Panopticon is maybe the most brilliant part of her whole kit to me, because for the unaware, the Panopticon is this theoretical concept of a prison shaped like a bird cage with a big pillar in the middle where all the cells line the walls and face the center. The gimmick of the Panopticon is that nobody in the cells can see into the pillar, but the people in the pillar can see out into the cells, meaning that the prisoners can never tell if they are or aren't being actively observed, which forces them to act as though they are always being observed, turning them into their own warden effectively. It's a prison of their own making in a sense. There could be no one in that middle pillar, but they have to act as though there must be someone. Oftentimes the Panopticon is used as a metaphor for the surveillance state, but Domina takes it in a much more literal direction. Namely, It's a personal prison, an isolating bubble that she puts her opponents in where she gets to shoot at them at her leisure while they can't shoot back. The kind of person who would build an ability around this interpretation of the Panopticon is low-key a fucking psychopath, and I think this is kind of where people misunderstand her a bit. Her strength comes from being the type of person who is willing to do cruel things, not because she just enjoys cruelty as much as because she recognizes its efficacy. Again, it's a trait I think she shares with Vendetta here. Vendetta savors revenge for sure, but she doesn't really savor cruelty. She didn't torture Doomfist or slowly shred him or whatever else the way Moira would have. She just wins the fight and kills him, or thinks she kills him. He's obviously not dead, but whatever. We'll pretend for her sake, I guess. Domina uses the Panopticon because she's found in her corporate career that instilling that kind of fear in her enemies of perpetually being observed and constantly being in an asymmetrical battle with her puts her ahead when she needs it. So she takes that with her. Her and Vendetta don't feel the need to fight a fair battle. They feel the need to win. And why would they want a fair battle? People aren't fair to them. Why do they owe a fairness that is never so much as even offered to them? Part 6. All I'll ever know is life upon a throne. I think by this point I made it pretty clear that I think Domina is a really fascinating character. I don't think Overwatch has introduced a character this interesting in a really, really long time. And not for lack of trying, let's all be clear about that. Characters like Ramattra have tried to say something bigger about the world and fallen very short, because it is hard to tell a complex story about forces so simultaneously personal and systemic through a character in a game like this. Domina somehow manages to do it though, invoking all these complicated subjects and then utilizing them both through the character herself as well as her interactions with so many others to tell a really compelling story. And I think it doesn't hurt that we're grappling with some very complicated questions surrounding wealth and power and class and corporate control and modern day colonialism in the real world at the same time. Part of Ramattra's weakness is that he tried to be a stand-in for these real world issues of racism and oppression in a way that trivializes it, but Domina doesn't try to stand in for like an Elon Musk or a Donald Trump or even an Usha Vance. She's evocative of a lot of their characteristics, to be clear. The desperation to be respected and acknowledged as talented and brilliant, the tackiness, the willingness to acquiesce to and weaponize the stereotypes that hold others like her down so that she can get ahead personally. All of that is reflected in her without being a straight parallel for any one of them in particular. She's this very modern member of the upper class, an example of how diversity in the C-suite does not stop the working class from being exploited, and that every group on Earth has people willing to sell their own down the river to get ahead. Part of why I can't stop thinking about her is that the Overwatch team has found a way to encapsulate so many of the complicated aspects of not only the rich and powerful, but also our relationship to them. You can think that Domina's mother, because you can acknowledge reality, but that doesn't mean that you're going to take her side when she's talking to Lucio about how she loves skinning chinchillas. When the dancers call out her lack of talent, it's a good read most of the time, but when she tries to get back at them, it always falls a little bit flat because I think it's always underscored by this insecurity, this defensiveness, this anxiety that she has. I'm sure she is the mother when she's around normal people, but in this environment, she isn't. And her diva behavior can kind of make you overlook the fact that she is kind of just extremely very outright evil. Arguably one of the most evil people in the entire Overwatch universe. She is straight up a fucking monster in a very real way, honestly. Making deals with Vendetta to allow them to fuck up cities so that Vishkar can come in and make bank off the reconstruction. This takes war profiteering to a whole other level, honestly. She doesn't love cruelty because it makes her feel good. She loves it because it's effective at getting her what she wants. And honestly, I think that might be kind of worse. Plus, frankly, I wouldn't be doing my duty as a homosexual if I was not ride or die for an objectively evil woman in fiction. She's Mother, and Mother fucking 8. Thanks for watching. I know this isn't the video that I'd promised, but a long game isn't inherently a good game. Will be coming out next week instead. I apologize for getting the Overwatch brain rot again, and I apologize even further because it will be continuing down the road. Anyways, if you enjoyed this one, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more, and consider becoming a channel member for $5 a month on YouTube or Patreon to support the channel and vote for future content. Another video is coming next week, and then probably 2 more the week after that because I hate myself and my editor quite a lot apparently. Anyways, thank you very much to all my channel members. The $25 Elite membership tier, thank you to Adele, Robot Juice, and Bingo Banga. At the $10 Premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, and to Tenar, Cavi Corbin, Corey Anders, and JD, and Mooney. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Alex Stone, Destiny, Cadence, Marsh Alice, Gavos, Crimson Cyclo, Caliber 192, Corey, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Meep Cube, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskell, Deco _, Safon, Lala the Bambi, Teo Tamara, Alinea, Caffeine Jelly, Ismi, Aiden S, 1000 Dumplings, Nilos, Lily Hero, Mitzicore, Bubble Boy, and Shy J. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or just somebody who decided to click on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.